Hey, everybody. Greetings from Clark County, Ohio. It's on the western part of the state. I just wanted to show you, this is like the family homestead where I grew up. It's a beautiful day here. I think it's a beautiful day in New York. Sorry, I'm just like trying to show you the barn. The barn is hidden by trees, but you can see the beautiful field and everything is very inspiring. So this is where, if you read the poem Errant Pastoral, this is sort of the location of that. And my family has lived in like 4 different houses on this same country road. It's pretty cool. So anyway, summertime! I just wanted to quickly answer your questions. I won't keep you much longer here. But before I get into the questions that you posted, I want to thank you for all of your hard work. And I loved reading all the comments in class discussion 7 about how you appreciate each other, which I think is the best thing of all, because the best thing that I can do for students is to create a space for them to meet each other and collaborate and work together, because I think that's really important. Okay, so now I'm going to go to your question. Nick, what genre do you find most fun to write about? Maybe you mean write in? I have trouble staying interested in my writing unless there's a lot of conflict or a deep message in it. Um, like many of you, I really enjoy, there's bugs, personal writing. So poetry obviously is the one that I have the most experience in, the most that I've done. I also do creative nonfiction, so I like to write essays. I'm working on a memoir. We'll see how it goes. I think there's a lot to be said. I have to say I haven't really branched out into a lot of fiction lately. It's been a long time. Many years ago, I wrote a couple of plays. I haven't done that in a while either. Stephen, what was the greatest? Stephen, you are so funny. I just have to say, you're really, really funny. Very honest, keeping it real. And you worked really, really hard. I saw you. I saw that. What was the greatest lesson, guidance, help you received about writing during your studies at an educational institution? What was the greatest lesson, guidance, help you received about writing after formal education? I had some really great teachers both during my schooling and after. I could list a bunch of names, but basically, you're asking what they told me. I guess I would just say write and revise is probably the main overall message that I got from them, and just practice, do writing every day. So all the things that I've told you guys to do, I've learned from my teachers too. Cassie, do you trust yourself to know when you've written something? My daughter's just about to join us. Good, worthy of publishing, or do you need to get a second opinion? So that depends. I do have trusted friends that I show my work to. Oftentimes, I am my own toughest critic, so I've been able to sort of internalize that editing process more and more over the years. I think that helps. But I still like to have some feedback from others too. Getty, what do you do when you have writer's block, or do you even get writer's block? So I posted this in the discussion, and I'm going to share this PDF with everybody. I forgot to mention this. I used to use this as a mini lecture, but it's how I conquered writer's block. When I was in graduate school, I had a professor who was very supportive of my work. He's the one who basically made me do iambic pentameter, and I really got a lot out of it, which is why I force my students to do it now. But he sort of didn't like what I was doing when I got to my, he was great with my master's degree. When I got to my PhD, I was working on my dissertation. He somehow wasn't a fan. So I asked him if he would help me with my creative dissertation, be my advisor. And he said, I don't think you're capable of writing a creative dissertation. So that's nice, right? And I was plunged into a block. I mean, therapy, a lot of things. But as I say in the document, 2 books in particular really helped me. And I've also talked to a couple people about the artist's way. So there's 3 things. There's writing down the bones, doing those short writing assignments, shitty first drafts, and other things from Bird by Anne Lamott, and something called The Artist's Way, which is a kind of a self-help book for creative people. And one of the tools is to write 3 pages longhand every morning in your notebook. Again, I'll give you guys all some links to that. And I still have to go back and do this. It happens. I mean, we don't have time. There's a lot going on. My job is really demanding. My family has a lot of demands that they're placing on me. And so, you know, I always have to go back and do these things. And I just want to make sure everything, okay, yeah, I'm sort of cutting myself off here. All right, so next question. Let me do this really quickly. Kat, what type of environment is most conducive to you creating your best work? I would say I've learned to write anywhere, whether it's on the train, whether it's in class with my students. That's a great way for me to generate work once I can kind of dive into it and everybody sort of has that energy in the room. I do love solitude. Of course, we love to have a nice room. It would be wonderful. I could go to an artist colony, but I don't always have that opportunity. There is a wonderful place that I have spent a lot of creative time in called Paragraph. It's one of many co-working spaces in the city. It was one of the first places just for writers. It's on 14th Street. And of course, you have to pay and everything, but I love that. They have all these cubicles, and I really felt like I was doing a lot of work that I felt connected to then. Crystalise, how do you deal with people critiquing your work? Have you ever had a line in your work that was your favorite, but an editor or publisher wanted to change? If so, what did you change? Did you change it or keep it? Oh yeah, I did. I've had this happen. You know, sometimes you have to fight for what you want. You know, Natalie Goldberg, she has that chapter, I think it's called Owning Your Writing. It's towards the end, and I was literally just rereading it yesterday. And you know, she basically says it really belongs to you. And so you figure it out, you know, and so you have to learn to sift through and have a filter and figure out what it is that you need to take from others. If somebody's going to publish your work, I mean, I recently submitted some poems and the editor was very positive, but he said, I would take this, but it has to have X, Y, and Z. And I'm going to do it because I want my poems to be on that site, you know? So that's the kind of thing that you have to decide. Letty, what inspired you to start writing? I think mostly my love of reading, sound, poetry that was read to me as a kid, nursery rhymes, Winnie the Pooh books, things like that. And I just found myself fascinated with it. And I think I talked in the interview about how I've also connected writing with music, which is a big thing for me too. Abby, what has been the highest and lowest point of your career? Wow, that's really tough. I would say one of the lower points is when I felt with my first book that I was getting rejected and rejected and rejected. And it took a very long time for the book to get accepted. That was a low point, but you just have to keep going. Have you ever had a line in your work that was your, oh, whoops, I'm sorry. When you're feeling low, how do you cope? Oh my gosh. When you're feeling high, how to use that energy to your advantage to keep you moving forward. I mean, Abby, I really feel like you almost in your questions have the answer. You have to just do it. You can get help from other people. You can get support from a trusted friend who knows you and can you know, it's good to have those friends who are real talk, you know, and just give you the truth. And also can encourage you and can remind you of the things you've already done. That's basically what I do. But I'll have to tell you, the number one thing for me is when I'm in the zone. And you guys know what I mean. When you're actually composing, you're creating, whatever it is, whether it's writing or whatever, and you're really getting into it, that feeling is not like nothing else. And so that's what really makes you want to do it. Jenna, when you're creating a piece of work, such as a story, poem, or book, do you organize an outline before writing? Do you recommend doing that? Example, a chart or list of all your thoughts. Because poetry is a little bit different, I don't do it exactly like that. However, I have been using, I've been doing this thing where I'm writing a poem a day in July, fingers crossed, and sharing it with a group by email. And I have been doing sestinas. I know I shared that forms of repetition with everyone, but I use the sestina generator. I take a book that I'm reading, I randomly page through, I pick 6 words that I think would be good, I plug them into the sestina generator, I create my template, and I write. And I literally spend about half an hour maybe writing the whole thing. It's hard. it's like, woo, you know, but it's really good, and it's a really good feeling when it's done. So in a lot of ways, having that kind of a framework, the same thing with Pantoums and those other like Villanelle, those templates, that can be really fun and it can be really generative. And that's what Catherine Barnes and I were doing a lot in our workshop at the Westchester Poetry Conference at the beginning of June. I think that oftentimes it's better to start drafting and then do an outline. You may have heard of mind mapping or concept mapping. That's something that people do, just sort of drawing and sketching with lines connecting circles. You know, there's a lot of different ways you can do it that isn't sort of like A, B. I'm sorry if I'm shaking around. I'm trying to find a good angle that anyway, but I think there's a lot of different ways to do it, but I think you have to really generate the stuff first before you do anything else. Okay. Kaylin, if you find yourself repeatedly inspired by the same thing, how do you present it differently to the reader? When you get stuck or ideas on ideas, what helps you break through and feel inspired again? That's a tough one. I mean, I think you just have to remind yourself that it's a phase. It's kind of like anything in life. And if you're struggling through a tough time, this too shall pass, you know, is kind of something. But I think with writing, you have to just sort of write through it. Oftentimes, doing an external prompt, something that somebody else is sharing with you, and something that, like, for example, go on Twitter if you're interested in writing poetry this summer and do look up the hashtag summer of prompts, one word. And Mary Bittinger, a friend of mine, has posted prompts on every Friday for the summer. So like I might look at that and that would kind of get me out of it. But, you know, honestly, you really do find that you have your obsessions. And what I say is just write to them. You know, do a sestina about it, do a repetition form about it, and then just see what happens. Suyun, what are some ways to boost my writing confidence so that I can hit publish on Medium or other platforms in the near future? And I know, Deshaun, you said you were interested in the answer to this too. This is a good question. You know, writing confidence, I think you are never going to be as confident as you think you should be. And what you have to remember is that most writers don't have confidence, they just do it. You know, you have this sort of discipline to overcome it. And again, I think revision is huge. You know, putting something aside and going back to it later. Natalie Goldberg's chapter on revising at the end of her book is so helpful. You know, basically put it away for at least a week, sometimes even longer, and then come back to it. If you need to get feedback from other people, but maybe not too many other people, you know, because you really have to kind of do it. And I'm just going to tell you right now, rejection is part of the game. You just have to get used to it. I know it's tough. It's not fun. It hurts. It still is uncomfortable for me, okay, which is honestly, I don't submit a whole lot. Sometimes I submit to when people ask me to submit something and I know they're going to take it. But you do have to just do that. And please keep in touch with me if I can help you with that. I would love to do that. That's for everyone. Yilin, our champion participator. Good job. When did you first realize you wanted to be a writer? I think I talked about that a little bit earlier. What is your work schedule like when you're writing? It's the same as it is all the time. This coming month, I'm hoping to set aside some blocks of time because I'm done with this class. I have, you know, my other work as chairperson is kind of tapering off. But normally I just have to squeeze it in whenever I can. How long does it take you to write a book? As long as it takes. It takes a long time. With poetry, you know, because you can write it in chunks and at different times, you write the poems and then you kind of look back over the last couple of years and you collect them all together, put them in an order, and you kind of figure out, you know, and then you shape it and then maybe you share it with someone. This is basically what I did with both of my books, Saint Nobody and The Miracles. So it can take, I mean, The Miracles came out 10 years after my first book. I would say some of the poems were starting to be written after the first book was published, or even before, between the time it was done and that it was published. Because that's the thing you have to remember. Unless you have a book contract and it's a different kind of thing, not poetry, you know, you have to find a publisher. You have to get that book published and accepted. So there's another kind of stage to that. I also am going to give you all a link to my sister-in-law, Jessica Lemmon's blog. She's a very successful freelance writer. What she does is romance novels, and she works all the time. She has a very, very dedicated work schedule, but that's her full-time job. And it's great. She's been able to do it, and she's amazing. So she has some really good tips for writers on her blog too. The longest I've ever had writer's block, I guess I don't measure it in months or years. I mean, the writer's block I had from graduate school, I definitely struggled for maybe 2 or 3 years, but I was writing something, you know. So I don't think I've ever, because of these techniques that I've learned from Natalie Goldberg and Anne Lamott and Julia Cameron from The Artist's Way, I haven't ever been just completely blocked. How does it feel to be a published author? It feels really good, but it also doesn't feel like, as a poet, poetry is not super popular in our culture. So it feels anticlimactic. No, that's not true. It feels good, but it feels better to know that I'm going to keep writing. That really feels good. And then, of course, one of the best things is when people actually read your work and they respond to it and they write and reach out to you. It's awesome. Deshawn, what was the longest time it took to finish a poem? Oh, golly. One of the poems in my first book, I remember I wrote it when I was in graduate school in the early 90s, and I didn't have a final version. Like, I was revising it in 2008. Okay, so 15 years to actually make it work exactly the way I wanted. But that's not typical, okay? What happens is, as I gained skills, as I was reading more and writing more and learning more, I felt like I had more to bring back to the original version of the poem, and it was awesome. It was really a good feeling to be able to do that. Typically, I would say I can draft something in a day or so. Sometimes I have to just take breaks and go back to it depending on my schedule. And then maybe I'll revise it in maybe a couple of hours, but it really takes concentrated effort. Allie, how did you get started in writing? I talked about that before. Do you have a piece of yours from when you first started writing um, then you wanted to do for the rest of your life? I'm not sure there was like an aha moment, but I remember I wrote a poem about being in the tree that I like to climb in my grandparents' yard. I think I said this somewhere. You guys might have read this, so I'm sorry if this is redundant. And then I remember there was a time when I was in a car. I was like maybe 11 years old, and I was in the car, and I saw this beautiful group of trees, and I wanted to paint it, and I'm not artistically talented, unlike many of you. And I needed to render it somehow, and I used words. And so I wrote a poem, and then that just really felt good. And then I also really liked bringing characters to life, so that was a lot of fun too. And my brothers and I used to do things like we would take our old cassette recorder and make radio shows. It was really funny. But I think a lot of that creativity just was fun, and it was play, and that's a lot of what it was about. Julianne, what is your most favorite piece you've ever written, and what inspired it? Well, I would say that the poems in the Miracles right now are very close to me because I worked really, really hard on them. And in fact, a year ago was when I was just finding out that my book was accepted and I needed to revise it. And so I think that poems from that book are probably the ones that are closest to me right now. Raymond, last but not least, if you're ever doing any poetry readings this summer, please keep me in the loop. Will do. Anyone else is interested, I can do that too. So I think you should be able to respond in the comments. Again, I'm going to give you guys some links. It was really, really awesome to see you. Let me see if I can get my camera back on. It was really awesome to meet all of you, and I really enjoyed meeting some people in person or in Hangouts. Have a great rest of the summer, and take care, and keep in touch.